Gentlemen, it's an honor to have you back on the show. Welcome back to Friends from Work, 2-time guests now.
Love it.
Honored.
Thanks for having us back. Yeah, we're honored to be back twice. Yeah.
How long ago did you turn in the Daredevil Born Again score? I'm kind of curious about that because, you know, you're now talking about it, but has this been months since you turned it in?
Oh, boy.
Yeah. I want to say it's been years since we started it and definitely many months since we turned it in. I'm trying to think exactly. We're in April. It's all a blur, but I feel like it was like last fall. Is that right?
Wow.
Taylor?
Wow.
Yeah, something like that.
Is there a difference between film and TV with that? Because I kind of wondered if, like, with film, you have to turn it in a certain amount of time ahead of time so they can get it to all the theaters. But with TV, could you theoretically tweak something like 2 weeks in advance or not?
Theoretically, I think you can push it a little bit further. Well, it depends on the movie, to be honest, too. You can push we've been on some stuff that got wildly close to that was getting released in theaters that was like a massive, like, on the line. So I think it just depends on the project.
Interesting.
Visual effects sometimes slow things down, or maybe a creative will want to make like a last minute like edit or change to something that they feel that needs to be changed. But yeah, I think this one, the thing about Marvel is they tend to bring you on really early, like way in advance, which is great because you can develop themes and suites and ideas. And then sometimes on projects you come in last minute because maybe somebody was fired or something didn't work out. So it changes.
Yeah. How often do you find that something is pretty much ready, like you've got a scene scored or a whole episode scored, and then, like, do you ever want to go back and tweak something yourself? Are you ever asked to, like, the scene's lengthened and now you need to go in and alter the track to some degree, or is that not really a common occurrence?
Yeah, that happens pretty often, actually.
Okay.
A lot of times things are developing, like, even as I think with technology, it's allowed the process to, like, keep going until the finish line in all departments, which I think ultimately usually serves the project pretty well because you're able to, like, figure out things that you didn't necessarily think would work or intend to do in every department. And it works nicely. It can be chaotic, but to that point, sometimes we'll need to, it can go a variety of ways. Sometimes we need to rescore a scene, lengthen a scene, shorten a scene. Sometimes a music editor, music editors are sort of the unsung heroes of, like, the final process of music. Like, they're the people who are taking the songs and the score and making sure, like, everything's dialed in. So, like, we have music editors who will sometimes, like, if we've already recorded the orchestra for a scene and they're, like, adding 12 frames, we'll, like, find 4 bars and can time stretch by, like, 12 frames, the entire thing, so that you'd never know. It's similar to, like, when the Beach Boys did, there were a couple tracks, but I don't know if it wouldn't it be nice? I think Wouldn't It Be Nice? I could be wrong,
nice?
That sounds
LA and New York. Like, I could be wrong on the song, but the chorus was recorded in New York and the verse was recorded in Los Angeles, and they stitched it together with tape. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's just interesting, like, the surgery of it all, but also maintaining the vibe is the most important thing. And that's sort of, I know I'm kind of going off what you asked, Robbie.
No,
that's
sort interesting.
Sort of relevant to, like, how it all comes together.
Do you, and sorry, just to follow up, because I'm curious now, bringing in the music editing piece and I know that you also have the music supervisor who I think is, correct me if I'm wrong, responsible for picking a lot of the needle drops there.
Yes.
Is that something that you kind of know about? Like, when are those calls normally made and when are those communicated to
Good
y'all?
point. Like this last episode, the credits, for example.
Yeah, I think, Justine does the music for this show, and she is very, very talented. And I think it's, again, we have a really strong team that can grab and maneuver. And I think as a music supervisor, you have to present several options and to the creatives, and they choose. And then there's also the time of, having to go get the clearance for the song and then making sure if an edit or cut changes, are the beats going to feel the same to the song? So there's so many little details.
Yeah.
And she works, she's just amazing at doing that. And so, the team was also very, very musical on this show. They're all very much fans of music and had, some ideas and things they wanted to try and do. So it was very much a collaborative sort of approach.
Yeah, in some cases, the songs will be in the script,
That's
and in
true.
some cases, those will end up in the show. And other times there'll be challenges with it, like, oh, we wanted this song that's in the script in the show, but we can't afford it. The label isn't getting back to us. Whatever the reasons are. And in those cases, everyone sort of comes together, and that's where like Justine, the music soup, will come in and suggest ideas. But as Taylor said, like the whole team on this project is very like music driven. So everyone from the showrunner and the directors and the Marvel execs, they all have, great music taste. So it was real fun to work with everyone.
And I will say some scenes are cut to the track. So like if they're in the script, when the editors get the dailies or the pieces and they're assembling the whole thing, they're cutting the beats to a song. So that's why if you wonder like, wow, why is this song so perfect?
Yeah.
It's beats. It's because they cut to it.
Yeah.
Love that.
That's cool.
And not to keep going on this, but it's super relevant to like this week's episode. That whole, because you guys have seen this week's episode already, I'm sure, right?
Oh
yeah. Yeah. So that whole like end scene was, designed to play with like score and songs and obviously dialogue and all the sound effects that are happening while like the dancing is going on, for example. Luckily Taylor was like the main person in charge of that scene. I got the nod it on that. I mean, we both help each other, but that's a lot to do when you're weaving in and out of music, because you want to you don't want to pretend that you're the song that's playing, right? But you also don't want to like rub. So you have to consider like certain keys are just going to bother people who are like not musically inclined. So you want to stay away from that, but you don't necessarily want to be in the same key. And then anyway, so it was really fun this week to sort of work with all of that.
It was a masterpiece is what it was this week.
Yeah.
Thanks, God.
That scene especially. Yeah. Geez.
Robbie, I'm going to hijack this for a second. I have two, overarching questions I'm going to get to in 1 second. But since you just brought this up, I was kind of curious, what are the advantages or disadvantages to you guys composing stuff together? I mean, how did you guys start as a team doing this together? And in what ways is the collaboration helpful, or is it ever hurtful?
No, I would say there's not really the way that we work. There's no more disadvantages. Maybe when we first started together, it was a little, trying to get things to smoothly, go between machines and stuff. But no, I mean, we've been doing this for years and years now. And we met, we were friends, and he was writing on movies and tons of stuff, and I was a fan of his work. And so it's definitely hugely beneficial, now especially because there's multiple ideas that are filtering constantly, as another person, almost like having you're writing a script and you're sharing ideas, and certain things will trigger other ideas, and you go back and forth, and it allows also a filtering process before creatives are hearing the final pieces, because it's really important that especially with something that you yourself are such a big fan of, you want to do justice by the project. And there's always lots of input and feedback too. There's a lot of, it's a team effort. It's not just here's the music and go,
Sure.
There's a lot of input. So it helps having someone else, kind of give you feedback as well, being like, I really like this theme, but I don't like this sound. And, it really allows a layering process.
Does one of you act more as the producer and one more as the writer, or is it pretty shared, or no, it's pretty shared?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty equal, and it's kind of similar to, I mean, you guys are musicians, so when you've written something and you really dig it, and then you bring in somebody to play trumpet or play drums on it or like play on it, and you play it for them and they're like, cool, I got the idea. And then they do something and it kind of blows your mind. And you're like, oh my gosh, I thought this was like a 9 out of 10. And then you just played on it. And now I realize it was actually like a 5 out of 10. And now it's actually a 9 out of 10.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
That's not to say we make each other's tracks 9 out of 10 all the time. But it's more about like, more about like the excitement of passion and influence when you're sort of trying to figure out what works, because it's tricky, right? You might fall into something where you're like doing the same thing again. And Taylor and I are really good about trying to like, yo, man, we've done that before. Like we can't fall back on that. And sometimes people want us to do something that we've already done. And that's tricky too, because, you want to try to, Radiohead does a great job of it, like,
Yeah.
the fans immediately are like, wait, what am I listening to? But
sure.
like you start to listen to it and you're like, oh man, I'm on the cruise. I love it. Like this is, they're
kind of out
lots
front
of artists do it. Yes, totally. But it's a hard thing to do because it's so easy to just fall into like, oh, this worked, so let's just roll with that, and like Daredevil, there are things that work in action scenes that just like sit easily behind action, which is just like driving, pulsing percussion. But that's not always the answer, and so a lot of like in Daredevil, a lot of what we found was working was like the motor of like the organ playing very quickly, very simple passages, but very quickly, and using the organ in place of like big sort of driving drums and pulses.
It's almost like the difference between being true to it in substance and being true in form, where I think that you can do one and not the other. And I think that there's a world where you can do something that sounds a lot like what people would expect a Daredevil score to sound like, but it doesn't click correctly. And that way it doesn't feel true to it. And I think that seems to me like it would be an easy trap to fall into if you're being asked to repeat something that's happened before that you've done before.
And I think there's always a third element, which is that that it's not always a prescriptive situation where they're like, hey, this is what we want. It's changing based off of feedback, multiple opinions, edits. So it's what you might think will work for one thing may not work later. So, it is a bit of a process.
In regards to the theme, because I'm looking at Robbie's X-Men 97 vinyl over here, and we actually had John Pisano on the show a couple times before to talk about his work with Spider-Man and then obviously with Daredevil. Talk to me about the theme. What's it like reworking a theme that's already existing, and how is it different than what you had to do with X-Men 97? Because you also had to do that main theme there too. And I guess what elements to the version that we got do you feel like better suit Born Again versus like what the Netflix series was doing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well, first of all, the original intention wasn't necessarily to use the original Netflix theme, because the show wasn't. It was more about a reboot rather than a continuation and expansion. And then after the strike came back and they made changes, and then they did reshoots and edits and all different things. They creatively decided to, hey, we need to expand this, we need to do this, and it was very much a talked about decision, and thankfully so, because it really is really what the fans, I think, really wanted. They wanted a continuation of the series, and this expands upon that. So it's not just a straight like here's season 4. There are changes, and it's also time has passed. Matt is in a different place, and so we really wanted to, at that point, how do we take the theme that's existing and make it work for this story? So we added organ, more choral pieces, really bringing in sort of those elements. And then the big thing for us was, Matt Murdock, he, what is his theme when he's not Daredevil? And that is sort of why, even in the intro, you see the beginning before it goes into the Daredevil theme. It's just Matt's theme, because he's essentially what the impetus is that sort of gets him going for the whole season is the fact that he lost one of his best friends. And so he's not in that, he's sort of internally struggling. He's haunted by choices he's made, things, he blames himself for what has happened. So that is sort of where we are. Isn't just, the superhero of it all. It's the fact that he's broken.
I love that, because we've talked all through the season about how much like this show, or whether you consider this a season or a new series, of all the great Daredevil stuff that we've gotten so far, I feel like this is the first time we've gotten this much of a look at Matt just as Matt. Like, both because of plot wise, he's not putting on the Daredevil suit as much, or at least for the first chunk of the series, but also because we kind of just get to see him have a healthy, functioning life.
He's
so
always broken down in the original Netflix stuff. He's never actually functioning well.
So like hearing you talk about having that in mind, I think that's come across really well kind of throughout the series.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, we did lots of variations of even the intro piece, and as, I think being a fan even of the original Netflix series, I love the theme that John wrote. And I think it's really strong. And I think too, as fans, you become acclimated to certain pieces of music and even the way things are shot and color palettes. And I think that, it's tricky trying to expand on that and change it and sort of enhance it. And I really feel like, the team really wanted to sort of honor the existing material and sort of expand it from there. And I think that was the intention. So we were all kind of, on the same train.
That's a fascinating discussion in and of itself, because throughout the MCU, just as one example, there are times where, like, when the Avengers show up, you need the Avengers theme, because as fans, like, we're looking for, it's like Pavlov's dogs. We need that theme. But then there's other characters that have, like Thor, for example. Every film has been a different motif for him. And there are times where we're like, oh man, I kind of wish it was like the first one. Why not build on the first one? But then, like, at first I judged what Michael Giacchino did for the fourth one. And then over time, I'm now obsessed with it. And so I think even that's a fascinating discussion, like when to reboot a theme versus when to keep it going. It's not even really a question, just interesting to me.
Yeah. Do we lose Andy? Is
he's reconnecting.
He's reconnecting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point you bring up, and I think the answer is like X-Men '97, for instance. We really didn't change a lot on that. You know what I mean? That opening of that theme. It was more about modernizing it a little bit, and sort of, even in the recording process with an orchestra, that's going to make it sound different. And, oh, you're back. There you are. And sort of, it's just it's what I feel like the fans, or what we felt like, the fans wanted to see. And I feel like also the executives were like, wanted the same thing,
Yeah, let's connect it.
Yeah, it's connected. And so you hear that theme and you're like, oh, that's the X-Men. And I think there's some places where it's tricky, like Superman. You hear what Hans did on Superman, and you hear there's the original John Williams Superman. And I think it's a tricky line. I think when you have a complete recast and it's like all new people, does that warrant the time to bring in new themes? It's a good question.
I'm curious, because I was going to ask before we came on what the pivot halfway through that creative process did musically, and kind of where y'all were. It sounds like you had made a good bit of headway before the decision was made to bring on a new showrunner and directors. Did y'all, how much of the original music that you had created is still in the series, and how much was totally reworked or reinvented after that decision?
A lot of it, actually. I think we had a pretty good, in our sort of first run at music. I mean, I would say most of it is actually in there, with the exception of,
oh, nice.
I mean, we probably wrote about 4 hours of music in the sort of beginning phase of our sort of concept. Now that's not all fully produced, but like it's in some stages. Some are fully produced, some are just like mocked out ideas on a variety of instruments. But I would say most of them are in there in some capacity, with the exception of maybe, I mean, probably 70% of the music we wrote is in the show now. And the other 30% that's not in there is just, conceptually just, other ideas that just didn't quite land for, and a lot of it's trying things. I mean, one of our first ideas was like, let's take John's theme and just play the whole thing on a church organ, just that, just all by itself, So that doesn't exist in the show anywhere, but that was like one idea, and then sort of riffing off of like where that could land. And as Taylor said earlier, figuring out like, okay, where like the storyline for this season is very much about Matt and his sort of conflicted sort of point of view. And we wanted to have sort of that be prevalent or a part of the main title in conjunction with Daredevil.
I really want those demos to be released at some point. That seems like something that could show up on a vinyl. I'm just saying. I'm sure there are a lot of people that have to sign off on that sort of thing, but I'm at least planting the seed.
You're asking for a friend. I want to get you guys out of here on one compliment and then a really last in the weeds nerdy question. First of all, I just want to say, compliment wise, I love that you leaned into the organ and the choir, because this podcast, the listeners know I'm a huge sucker for the choir stuff. So I love that you brought that in so much. It just makes everything so epic.
Thank you.
And on that, the really in the weeds nerdy question, this is more for me than anyone else. I see all the synths behind you, Andy. I'm curious, where in the process do you when in the process, I guess, do you decide when something should be a sample versus when something should be real? So like, how much of it is our plug-in strings versus we got to get an orchestra, or this is a sound we can only create on a synth that we can't really create with a real orchestra, versus, or even like choir patches versus getting an actual choir to do it? Like, how do you blend that? And is it literally just a song by song thing, or is there something more like from a vibe perspective that informs that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, at first, it's the necessity, like in writing, right? Like what Taylor and I are sort of like held to based off of what we have in our rooms. So Taylor has even more synthesizers than I have. He's got like the mad scientist lab over there, but it's sort of like at first limited to what we can play, which is, like piano, cello, like a variety of like wind instruments, guitars, whatever. But then also like singing and layering vocals and then using samples. And then it gets to a place where like the production becomes as big a part of it as the writing, for us at least. On our end, we like to sort of get the writing going, but we've sort of found over the years that like during that writing, because of technology, the producing starts happening, as you guys know, right? When you're sitting in with it, like you'll do something that maybe 25 years ago, they'd save until the mix to like dial in how the kick sounds. But in this case, like we might like I'm a terrible drummer. So like I will use like drum samples, or I will perform like found sound and then I will chop it up because I can't keep good rhythm. But then there's the dialing in of the sound, right? Like if, like in Born Again, we wanted to use we were trying to use big percussion for some of these hits we have for Fisk, and they just didn't have like the severity of a big thud. And so we grabbed like a car, like basically like my old car. When I dropped the hood, I was like checking the oil and I noticed like it makes a huge thud. So we recorded that. And that then ended up replacing some of these like deep, big water bottles we'd been hitting, like with a variety of amounts of water in them. But that sort of process is just sort of like the in the weeds of like where this goes with everything, right? And that applies to the orchestra and choir as well. Like we will usually record everything with the orchestra and the choir, but then we'll take sort of a producer's seat afterwards and go like, okay, the real choir is a nice texture here, but let's sync it underneath the sound of like the layers of Taylor and I, or Taylor and his assistant Lily or whatever's being sort of like put in the track. So
is
really
that one of you guys
like,
doing the?
Yeah, that's Taylor.
It is Taylor.
Oh, nice.
Heck yes, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes me happy.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so you sorry not to interrupt you, but you're just balancing that stuff every time. Sometimes you're recording the orchestra and choir, so you've written it, you kind of start the production with the tones, then you record an orchestra and choir, and then you kind of dial back from there. Like, can we supplement the fake strings? Can we supplement this sound that we made in our studio? And it becomes like a hybrid model.
Yeah, I think I mean, everything we tend to do, unless it's a period piece, is always hybrid. I think because we're really into the production of the sound and honing in. Almost the score is almost being treated like an album. It's almost more like
sound design-y.
Well, not just sound design-y, but like for instance, we use rather than electric cello, we use an acoustic cello that's being processed and it's delayed and it's pitching down for Born Again as he's sort of using his senses to see what's going on. And that's sort of like that, rather than making a sonar sound or just some heartbeat, like we have. That is sort of the sensation that the viewer is supposed to be feeling that's happening. And we tried the orchestra doing the same thing, and it just was it just didn't have that sort of feel to it. So we just played solo cello and we processed it and ran it through things. And as Mike said, so it's more about, at the end of the day, it's more about how does it make us feel and sound, and it needs to be, it needs to be different, but you need to have all of the availability to see at the end of the day what sounds the best, because you may not want a very 100% super cleanly phenomenally played piece. You may want it to have subtleties that give it sort of nuances. I think that's the
last thing, I swear, just because you said this. So you said you took a cello. I'm sorry. And you pitched it down and blah, blah, blah. And you were saying that was because you're messing with the idea of Matt's senses, right?
Yeah, there's a sequence when he's following a cop that Officer Powell, and you can see. Yes, that
is that first or a chicken or the egg? So did you think how do we get this sound because Matt's messing with his senses? Maybe we took a cello, or did you try the cello thing and then go, hey, that could actually work because it's like his senses?
That's a good question.
Yeah, no, we basically knew what we were going after. Some his sort of equivalent of spidey senses. We knew we wanted something. We had sort of heartbeats that were delayed. We had tunnels, we had subway sounds being sucked out almost as pads, which ends up actually in the main titles. But the cello thing worked well because it's cello delayed, but on the others, get super nerdy. One of the pedals has a pitch that pitches it up. You can degree how you want, a minor third, or how much you want it to fall out of tune. And so we had the delay sort of echoing, and then it would at the end sort of pitch a little bit down, and that's kind of what is happening.
This is the do 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 do. That's what you're talking about. Do do do.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Gosh, thank you. I just wasted a lot of your time, but that was so fascinating.
No, that's really fascinating. The slamming the car hood down that's a really fun fact.
It's fun, guys. Yeah,
it's fun. Yeah.
You guys are the best. Thanks for your time. Sorry to go long here, but we are such big fans of what you do. And we said this last time, the invitation is open. Standing invitation. Anytime you want to jump on and talk about it. We could go for another hour. I have more questions.
On. You guys rock,
I was just telling
super fun.
Kyle about how y'all have Life of Chuck coming out here in a couple months. And that's going to be a really fun one to talk about too.
Bring tissues. Yeah.
We'll have to definitely connect on that one as well. Yeah.
I read I'm a Stephen King fan, so I read the short story years ago. So I was really excited when I saw the folks involved. Obviously, Mike and the cast on that is insane. And then seeing y'all attached to it was the icing on the cake for me.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, Mike. I mean, obviously, Mike is just such a talented guy in so many levels, and that story is that is a very special story. Yeah.
We'll come back on with you guys once it comes out because it'd be fun to talk about that one with you guys.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys are the best. Thank you. We'll see you.
Thank you.